There was a time when the entire human story fit inside one landscape. Every breath drawn, every fire sparked, every footprint pressed into the soil was Africa, the cradle of our species, a continent of forests, rivers, and deserts, where Homo sapiens first stood upright as a people unlike any before. And yet, those first fragile generations did not know that they would one day walk across the world. They only knew the horizon, the hunt, and the quiet rhythm of survival. Hello there, and welcome to BoneAge. My name is Thomas. Tonight, we're tracing the path of the first exodus, the daring journey when small bands of humans left Africa against impossible odds, setting in motion the story that would one day reach every shore, every mountain, every frozen edge of this planet. But imagine it as it was, a species still scarce, still vulnerable, their numbers reduced in ages past to barely more than 1,000 breeding souls, a people who could have vanished like so many others. And yet, through that bottleneck of survival, something within them endured. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was desperation, or maybe it was something older still, a restlessness written into our very bones. What if the first great human journey wasn't planned at all, but stumbled into, tribe by tribe, step by step, until the land beneath their feet grew strange? What if the Sahara itself, that vast shifting ocean of sand, was humanity's first border, daring them to cross? And what if the Red Sea, narrow yet treacherous, became the first ocean we ever braved, a threshold between worlds? This isn't just a migration, it's the opening chapter of everything. Without it, there would be no villages in Europe, no hunters on the steppes of Asia, no first firelight flickering in the caves of France. There would be no us, gathered across continents tonight. And so, this story is not a debate, but an exploration, a soft tracing of footsteps through deserts, across waters, over glaciers, and into lands already filled with rivals, each step carrying risks so immense that most who tried perished, and yet somehow a few survived. Settle in and imagine the world 200,000 years ago, when our kind was young, when every choice to wander could end in silence, or ignite a lineage that would echo through the millennia. To begin, let's return to the place where it all started, the cradle of humanity, deep in Africa, where the first spark of Homo sapiens began to burn. Picture a dawn long before memory, the sun rising over a continent of vast savannas, lush river valleys, and scattered forests. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth, grasses shimmering with dew, and in that light a small band of figures moves across the plain. They are us, but not quite. Their faces are familiar, their hands and eyes unmistakably human, and yet their world is so different from the one you know that it feels like a dream. 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged on African soil. Not the only humans alive, there were others, cousins scattered across Eurasia. But in this place, something extraordinary took shape. Brains larger, more intricate than those of their ancestors. Voices capable of shaping not just calls, but proto-language. Hands refined for tools that could cut, scrape, and shape. They were a new species, fragile in number, but rich in potential. Imagine standing among them. The ground beneath your bare feet is warm, the soil still carrying the heat of the day before. In the distance, elephants graze among acacias, their tusks gleaming pale in the light. Antelopes scatter at the crack of a branch. Every sound matters. The distant cough of a leopard, the low thunder of approaching rain, the call of birds that signal water nearby. To live here is to read the land like a book, every page filled with signs of survival. And yet survival was never assured. Our species did not begin as rulers of this landscape. We were small, vulnerable, prey as much as predator. The ecosystems of Africa were abundant, but they were also dangerous. Lions prowled the grasslands, crocodiles lurked in rivers, hyenas circled the edges of the firelight. Even the plants were a challenge. Fruits ripened and rotted in quick cycles. Roots hid deep beneath hard soil, and many were poisonous. For every human born, the world was a test. Did you know which plants could be chewed for water? Could you tell if tracks in the mud belonged to a gazelle or a lion? Could you craft a stone flake sharp enough to skin a kill before scavengers arrived? Failure meant death, not just for one, but sometimes for the group. And yet, in this crucible, our species thrived. Archaeological sites across East Africa tell fragments of this story. Tools snapped from obsidian, flint, and chert. Hearths were fire-blackened stones, proving that flame was already a companion. Shell beads pierced with holes, perhaps worn as ornaments, perhaps as tokens of meaning, proof that imagination stirred in those early minds. These were not just survivors, they were becoming storytellers, but the numbers were small. Genetic evidence shows that for long stretches of time, our species lived in tiny populations, perhaps no more than a few thousand scattered across the continent. Imagine a world where every face you knew could fit into a single valley, where a drought or a plague could erase entire lineages in a single season. That was the reality of early Homo sapiens. We were fragile, an ember flickering in a storm, and yet somehow the ember held. Why here? Why Africa? Perhaps it was the richness of environments, from the Rift Valley lakes to the coastal shores, that offered refuge when climates shifted. Perhaps it was the challenge itself, heat, drought, flood, predators, that shaped resilience. What if our intelligence, our creativity, even our capacity for cooperation, was born not from comfort, but from hardship? Consider the Rift Valley, a scar stretching across eastern Africa. Volcanoes rise above plains where rivers carve deep valleys, and lakes swell and shrink with each change in climate. It was here that many of the earliest fossils of our species were found. Homo kibish in Ethiopia, where bones 195,000 years old whisper of a man and a woman who lived in a world half forgotten. The Turkana Basin, where tools and footprints reveal campsites of families long vanished. These places are not ruins, but beginnings. The ecosystems that nurtured them were a patchwork of abundance and scarcity. Rainfall could transform the land into a green corridor, drawing herds of game and flocks of birds. A decade later, the same land could crack under relentless drought, forcing groups to wander, to adapt, or to die. Imagine the uncertainty, waking each morning, not knowing if the rivers would flow, or if tomorrow's horizon would bring famine. In this uncertainty, early humans became masters of adaptation. They shaped tools, not just for hunting, but for survival in varied landscapes. A sharpened point could pierce the hide of an antelope, but it could also dig roots or split open bones for marrow. Fire was more than warmth. It was protection against predators, a tool for cooking that released nutrients locked in food, a circle of light in a world of shadow. And fire carried another gift, community. Picture a night on the savannah. The stars blaze brighter than anything you've ever seen, untouched by city lights. Around a crackling fire, men and women sit, children pressed against them, eyes wide. Stories are spoken, perhaps only fragments of myth or memory, but already shaping a world of imagination. The firelight paints faces, flickering across eyes that carry curiosity. In those gatherings, the bonds that made survival possible were woven. Still, For all their resilience, our ancestors remained tethered to Africa. Their world was wide but not infinite. Every horizon eventually led to ocean or desert, barriers too harsh to cross. For tens of thousands of years, all of humanity was confined to one continent. Think of that for a moment. Every human alive, every thought, every word, every love and loss, contained within the borders of Africa. The entire future of our species carried in a handful of tribes moving through savanna grass, river reeds, and forest shade. What if they had stayed? What if no one had ever left Africa? If the species had remained bound to its birthplace? The world as we know it, its languages, its histories, its cultures, would never have unfolded. The story of humanity would have been smaller, more fragile, perhaps lost to time like so many others. And yet, even then, the seed of restlessness was there. You can almost feel it if you close your eyes, the pull of the horizon, the call of lands unseen. It lingers in our bones still, the memory of being wanderers. The cradle of humanity was both a beginning and a cage. It sheltered us, but it also confined us. For tens of thousands of years, we remained bound to its cycles, its rhythms, its dangers. But within those limits, the essence of what we are was forged. Curiosity, creativity, resilience, and the restless drive that would one day push us beyond. The story of the Exodus cannot be told without first lingering here, in Africa, where life was both abundant and fragile, where our species stood at the edge of survival, unaware that the choices they made would shape every future life. And that brings us to the next question. What force could drive fragile bands of humans, already struggling in their homeland, to step beyond safety and into the unknown? Perhaps it began with nothing more than hunger, a river drying earlier than expected, a herd of antelope shifting its migration by a few miles, a season of fruit that ripened late. For a small band of humans, that single change could mean the difference between survival and collapse. To move meant risk, but to stay meant death. And so, step by step, they walked toward horizons they had never seen. But was it only hunger that moved them? Or was there something else, a restlessness, an itch in the mind that no fire and no shelter could quiet? For even when food was plentiful, when rivers flowed, and herds gathered in the grass, some would still look out across the distance and wonder what lay beyond. Imagine the feeling of standing on an open ridge at dusk. The air is cooling, the sky bleeding into shades of red and violet. Behind you lies the familiar, the grove where water can be found, the caves that shelter you, the faces you have always known. But before you stretches a line of hills, jagged and unknown, or perhaps the shimmer of heat over a desert plain. Something in you stirs, a mix of fear and pull. What if there is water there? What if there is nothing at all? Would you turn back, or would you take one more step forward? This tension between safety and wonder, between what is known and what might be, became the heartbeat of our species. Other animals migrate, yes, following instinct etched into their blood. Birds cross oceans guided by stars they cannot name. Wildebeest march across plains in endless cycles. But humans moved differently. We did not always walk because we had to. Sometimes we walked because we could. Archaeological evidence hints at this restless nature even before the Great Exodus began. Homo erectus, our ancient cousin, had already wandered far beyond Africa nearly 2 million years earlier. Their fossils appear in Georgia, in Indonesia, in China, proof that the urge to move was not unique to us, but woven deep into the human family. Yet their journey was slower, stretched across millennia. tied to survival alone. When Homo sapiens inherited the earth, that drive sharpened, grew hungrier. Our migrations came in waves, faster, riskier, less predictable. Why? Perhaps it was the brain itself, newly complex, brimming with memory, imagination, and fear. To picture a river not yet seen, to imagine a herd of animals in a valley beyond the ridge. This required more than instinct. It required story. And in story, there's always the possibility of something greater. Think of a small group huddled by firelight. The day has ended, the air cooling around them. Someone speaks of a time they wandered too far and found berries sweeter than any before. Another recalls a valley where the grass grew high and the animals came in great herds. Memory blends with imagination, and suddenly the unknown no longer feels empty. It feels promising. It feels like destiny. But destiny comes with danger. For every step taken beyond the known, the risks multiplied. A hill might hide predators. A desert might stretch farther than feet could carry. A river might flood without warning, sweeping the careless away. To move meant gambling with survival. And yet, again and again, they moved. Perhaps this is the paradox of our species, that we are drawn to danger even as we fear it. Curiosity has always pulled at us, the same curiosity that leads a child today to peer into shadows or climb where they should not. Back then it was not play but survival's edge. That drive, the one that pushes us into risk, was already alive. And what if this restlessness was not just instinct, but necessity written by time itself? Scientists studying ancient DNA have found signs of bottlenecks, near extinctions where only a few thousand of us survived. In those moments, to stay put might have meant perishing with the land. To wander was not merely curiosity, it was the only path left. Picture one of those moments. A drought grips the land, rivers turning to dust, herds vanishing. Around the fire, gaunt faces turn toward the horizon. The air tastes of ash, the grass crunches underfoot, and the elders murmur of times when the rains never returned. Perhaps one hunter stands and says, "There's another place, far to the north, where the trees still grow green." Maybe no one believes him, yet what choice is there? Hunger is louder than fear. And so the group rises. Children carried, fire carried, hope carried, and they walk. But here is the haunting question. What if some of those wanderings were not driven by famine at all? What if, even in abundance, some among them felt the call of the unknown? We are left to wonder whether the first exodus began not with desperation, but with desire. There is a rhythm to human movement that still echoes in us today, the need to leave home, to see what lies beyond, to push boundaries of safety. It might be the same restlessness that later carried us across ice to the Americas, or overseas to Australia, or even now, when rockets lift from Earth toward the silence of space. What if that drive began here, with the first footsteps beyond Africa's heartlands? And yet, the danger of this urge cannot be ignored. For every group that succeeded in their wandering, how many vanished, swallowed by deserts, drowned in rivers, consumed by hunger or predators? Imagine the countless stories that ended in silence, lineages that left no trace except in the faint shadows of our genes. For every successful migration, perhaps dozens failed, and still the wandering did not stop. What does that tell us about who we are? Perhaps that survival was never our only goal. Perhaps we are not just a species that endures, but a species that seeks. The restless drive may be the most human trait of all, the willingness to step into danger, to leave behind safety, to reach for something unseen. Close your eyes and imagine it now, a small band walking away from the fire, their figures silhouetted against a horizon of grass and cloud. They do not know what they will find. They only know they must go. Some carry hunger in their bellies. Others carry a dream they cannot name. But together, step by step, they walk into the unknown. And in that restless movement, the story of humanity begins to shift from survival within one cradle to the first whispers of exodus. To leave Africa was never simple. Between the cradle of humanity and the lands beyond stretched a barrier so vast, so merciless, that it seemed to have been placed there to keep us in. The Sahara. Not a desert as you know it today, fixed and eternal, but a shifting realm, sometimes green and fertile, sometimes a barren ocean of sand. A landscape that opened and closed like a gate, letting a few pass through in fleeting moments of fortune, then sealing behind them for thousands of years. Imagine standing at its edge. The land you know fades into dry plains, grasses thinning until they give way to endless dunes. The horizon is no longer broken by trees or rivers, but swallowed by heat haze. The air itself feels hostile, sucking moisture from your lungs, scorching your skin. It is a place that whispers of death more than life. And yet, for those who dreamed of what lay beyond, this was the threshold that had to be crossed. The Sahara was not always so unforgiving. Climate records carved into sediments and fossils revealed that every so often monsoon rains swept north, transforming sand into savanna, dunes into grasslands, and dry valleys into rivers. These were the green corridors, brief windows when the desert softened, offering routes northward. Imagine lakes appearing in basins now dry, hippos wallowing in what is now dust, herds of gazelle moving where no life survives today. For a few thousand years at a time, the desert would bloom, and in those seasons humans followed. But timing was everything. To be born in the wrong generation meant finding only sand where your ancestors once found water. Archaeologists have unearthed stone tools scattered deep within the Sahara, isolated like whispers, evidence that some groups entered during wet phases, walked for a while, and then were cut off as the rains withdrew. Perhaps they perished, their fires extinguished in the sand. Perhaps a few made it through, becoming threads in the larger tapestry of migration. The record is fragmentary, like footprints fading in wind. What must it have felt like to enter such a place? You can imagine the silence, broken only by wind and the crunch of feet on stone. Nights when the stars burned with such clarity that they felt almost within reach. Days when the sun pressed down like a weight and lips cracked with thirst. A mistake here was final, a miscalculated distance between water sources, a sudden storm burying tracks, an injury with no shelter. These meant death. And yet, again and again, our ancestors tried. Why? Hunger, yes, but also the knowledge that beyond this desert lay other lands, other rivers, other animals to hunt. The green corridors did not just open routes, they whispered possibility. To those who had already learned to survive Africa's droughts, the gamble must have seemed worth it. For even in death, the urge to move did not die. Scientists believe most of these attempts failed. Genetic studies show that only a few of the earliest migrations left lasting traces in modern populations. This means countless groups vanished in the desert, their lineages erased, their bones buried under shifting dunes. The Sahara became humanity's first true filter, a place where dreams and lives alike were tested. Picture one such group, a band of perhaps 20 or 30, carrying fire in embers wrapped in bark, children clinging to their mothers, hunters scanning the horizon. They move at dawn and dusk, resting at midday when the heat is unbearable. Their water is carried in skins, their food in bundles of dried meat or gathered roots. Each evening, as the sun falls, they huddle close and pray for the sight of green, but the desert stretches on. Days pass, the youngest weakens, the fire sputters, and then silence. Their story ends here, erased by sand, but perhaps another group, years later, found a different path. A valley where rain lingered, a chain of watering holes that carried them farther than before. They walked until the dunes fell away, until the land softened into grass once more. For them the Sahara was not a tomb but a passage, and in that fragile moment the gate opened. This cycle repeated for millennia. The Sahara closed, then opened, again and again. Each time humans tested it, each time most failed. But each failure was not in vain, for it proved something, that our species would not be contained. The desert could kill us, but it could not stop us from trying. What does that say about who we are? Perhaps that even the harshest landscapes became part of our story. The Sahara was not just a barrier, it was a teacher. It taught endurance, planning, cooperation. It demanded innovation, carrying water, timing journeys, reading signs in wind and sky, and in its cruelty it shaped us. Imagine now the silence of that place at night, the firelight flickering against dunes. A child looks up at the stars and asks what lies beyond. No one can answer, yet still they will walk, still they will gamble, still they will dream. The Sahara was not just a desert, it was the first great threshold between Africa and the wider world, a shifting gateway of life and death. Most who entered never returned, but a few, just enough, found the path through. And it's here, in this vast ocean of sand, that the Exodus truly began to take shape, not as a single event, but as a rhythm of attempts, failures, and fragile successes. Beneath the shifting dunes of the Sahara lies a silence older than memory, a silence that has swallowed whole generations. For every small band that reached water on the far side, dozens more never did. Their footprints were erased by wind, their fires extinguished by thirst, their bones scattered across a wilderness that cared nothing for them. If the cradle of humanity was our beginning, then the Sahara was our first great barrier, and it claimed more lives than we can ever count. Imagine the scene. A group sets out with hope, carrying embers wrapped in bark, skins of water heavy on their shoulders. Days pass, the sun blazes without mercy, and the wind shifts, erasing their path behind them. A child cries, a hunter stumbles, a mother whispers to herself as the horizon ripples with mirages of lakes that are not there. At night the stars burn brilliant, but their cold beauty offers no comfort. By morning one does not rise, by evening another. Within a week the desert has claimed them all, their bodies left where they fell, picked clean by scavengers, buried by drifting sand. How many such groups vanished, leaving no trace? Archaeologists tell us that stone tools and scattered remains deep within the Sahara bear witness to journeys that never finished, tools shaped by human hands but abandoned, campsites where fires burned once but no longer, isolated fragments of lives cut short. The desert is not only a barrier, it is a graveyard, a desert of bones. What makes this haunting is not just the loss, but the persistence. Time after time, across tens of thousands of years, humans tried again. Each generation must have known the stories, the ones who walked north and never returned. And yet, when the rains came and the desert bloomed, when rivers cut across sand and lakes glittered in basins, the gamble was taken once more. It was as though the urge to cross outweighed the certainty of death. What if the Sahara became more than a place of failure? What if it became a kind of memory, a scar written into the collective mind of our species? Perhaps sitting around a fire, elders told of the ones who vanished, voices low, as though speaking the desert's name might summon its hunger. And yet, even as they spoke of loss, they may have spoken of possibility, that somewhere beyond the sand lay valleys rich with water, animals thick on the plain, fruits unknown. Death and hope were bound together in the same story. There is something profoundly human in this, to walk into danger, knowing that others before you failed, to step where bones already lie, carrying the hope that you will not join them. Perhaps no other creature does this. Most animals follow paths of instinct, repeating the migrations of their ancestors. But humans stepped into places their ancestors had died again and again, believing the outcome could change. The Sahara thus became our first test, not of tools or fire, but of endurance, of imagination, of sheer stubbornness. To survive its crossing was to prove more than strength. It was to prove vision, to look at dunes that stretched beyond sight and still believe there was something on the other side. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it must have sounded like to fall silent in that place. The whisper of wind over sand, the rasp of breath, the shuffle of weary feet. Then nothing, no bird song, no rivers, no rustle of leaves, only the endless hush of emptiness. In that silence, entire lineages vanished, clans whose names we will never know, whose blood left no mark in the living. Ghost tribes lost to time, remembered only in the faintest echoes of genetic diversity, like shadows fading on stone. And yet, despite the toll, the desert could not stop us. Some groups did make it through. Perhaps they timed their journey perfectly, following storms that filled rivers just long enough. Perhaps they stumbled upon hidden oases, water cupped in stone bowls carved by ancient rain. Perhaps they simply endured longer, carrying with them the stubborn ember of survival that had already carried our ancestors through droughts and ice ages. What is remarkable is how thin the margin was. Survival may have depended on a single storm, a single hidden spring, a single decision to walk north instead of east. What if one band had chosen differently? What if those who succeeded had failed instead? Perhaps humanity would have remained bound to Africa, our story small, fragile, unfinished. The Sahara teaches us something essential about the Exodus. It was never guaranteed. Each crossing was a gamble, and most gambles were lost. The desert was not merely an obstacle, it was a filter. It chose who would carry the human story forward, not by design, but by chance, by timing, by luck. The ones who crossed left descendants, the ones who failed left only bones. And so the Sahara became a kind of boundary between life and death, between memory and oblivion. Those who survived must have looked back in awe, knowing how easily they might have joined the lost. Perhaps they carried stories of the desert with them into new lands, passing down warnings, shaping myths of exile and wandering. Could it be that even today, the deep unease we feel in barren landscapes is an echo of those trials, that the desert imprinted itself not only on our history, but on our psyche? Picture again the dunes under moonlight. Somewhere beneath them lie bones, countless and unmarked, layered by centuries of shifting sand. They are silent now, but their silence speaks. It tells us that the road out of Africa was paved not with certainty, but with sacrifice, that for every life that stepped into the wider world, many more were extinguished. The desert of bones was not the end of the Exodus, but its crucible. To step into it was to risk everything, to emerge from it was to begin again. Beyond the dunes, beyond the green corridors that opened only in brief windows of fortune, lay another threshold. This one was not sand but water, an expanse that shimmered in the sun and shifted with tides. It was the Bab el Mandeb Strait, a narrow passage that today separates Africa from the Arabian Peninsula. To the eye, it might have seemed deceptively close. The opposite shore, hazy in the distance, could be seen across the waves, and yet between them lay a barrier as deadly as any desert, the sea. Imagine standing there at the edge, waves foaming at your ankles, the salt air sharp in your lungs. Behind you stretched the desert, a land of thirst and bones. Before you, water that never ended, rolling and restless. It was here, perhaps 70,000 years ago, that small bands of humans faced a choice unlike any before, to trust themselves not only against land but against the sea. The Bab el-Mandeb is only about 20 miles wide at its narrowest. In times when sea levels dropped during ice ages, it may have been narrower still, scattered with islands that broke the crossing into shorter steps. And yet, for people who had never built ships, never charted a course by waves, those 20 miles were vast. Swimming meant exhaustion, drowning, disappearance. Rafts meant trial and error, wood lashed together and pushed into currents that could sweep the unready far out to sea, but somehow they tried. Picture it in your mind. A small raft of logs bound with vines, buoyant but fragile. A group of figures pushing it into the surf, balancing their weight as the water pulls at their legs. The raft lifts and rocks, threatening to spill them into waves. Behind them, the rest of the band watches in silence. If the raft tips, if the sea takes them, their story ends here. If it floats, if it carries them even part way, then a new world waits. Why would they risk it? Perhaps hunger once more, herds shifting eastward across Arabia, smoke on the horizon suggesting fires set by other tribes. Perhaps curiosity, the same restlessness that drove them through the desert. Or perhaps desperation, with the Sahara closing behind them and no road back. Whatever the reason, to step onto water was to step into the unknown in a way no human had done before. The first ocean crossing in history was not marked by triumph, but by fear. Every wave could overturn the raft, every hour drained strength. Sharks and crocodiles lurked in those waters, unseen but present. The wind itself could betray them, pushing them off course until land vanished behind mist. To survive required not just endurance, but trust that the raft would hold, that the horizon would deliver them to another shore. Archaeological traces suggest they succeeded. Stone tools on the Arabian side, dating to the same periods, tell us that humans did cross. Genetic evidence shows that from this passage came lineages that spread eastward across Asia, eventually reaching every continent. This moment, fragile, uncertain, was the beginning of a new chapter. Without it, humanity would have remained confined to Africa. With it, the world became open, and yet how many failed? How many rafts broke apart, scattering bodies into the sea? How many swimmers vanished beneath waves, lungs filling with salt water, their cries lost to the wind? The strait may be narrow, but it's treacherous. Its name itself, Bab el-Mandeb, means the gate of tears. Even today, its currents are strong enough to pull the unprepared to their deaths. For ancient humans, with no maps, no sails, no anchors, it must have been a gamble few survived. What if the first successful crossing was not a single leap, but a chain of smaller steps? Perhaps they waded through shallows at low tide, swimming from one rocky outcrop to another. Perhaps they lashed together reed bundles, crude but buoyant, learning by failure until one raft carried them through. Perhaps some crossed by accident, carried by storm currents onto Arabian shores, bewildered but alive. Whatever the method, the significance remains. This was the first time humans dared to leave land behind entirely, to trust their survival to water. It marked a shift not just in geography, but in imagination. To cross the sea is to believe that the world is larger than what you see, that on the far shore there's something worth risking everything for. Close your eyes and imagine being among them. The raft sways beneath you, water splashing your legs, the air thick with salt. Your heart races with each wave. Behind you, Africa fades into distance. Ahead, a new land glimmers, uncertain and strange. You do not know if you will reach it. You do not know if anyone will follow. But still, you cling to the raft, each breath a defiance of the sea. This crossing was not a conquest. It was a whisper of possibility. And yet, it changed everything. For once humans had crossed water here, they would cross it again. To Australia, to the islands of the Pacific, to every coastline on Earth. The ocean, once a barrier, became a road, but it began here, at the Gate of Tears, where fragile rafts and fragile lives first met the restless sea. The Red Sea crossing was not an end, but a beginning. From its shores, humanity spread outward, carrying with them the memory of risk, the knowledge that even oceans could be crossed. It was a step that turned wanderers into voyagers, a leap that transformed survival into destiny. Every wave that lifted those fragile rafts was a gamble. Each gust of wind that pressed against their backs or pushed them off course carried the weight of entire lineages. To set out upon the sea was not only to risk lives in the present, it was to risk futures that might never be born. One storm, one slip into the water, could erase a family, a tribe, even an entire branch of humanity, before it had a chance to spread. Imagine it. The raft creaks as water seeps between its bindings, vines straining under pressure. A child clings to a mother's side, eyes wide with fear as spray stings the skin. Above, clouds gather, and thunder rumbles across the waves. There is no shelter here, no cave to retreat to, no tree to climb. The sea offers only its surface, and if that surface turns violent, there's nowhere to hide. A single storm could scatter them, breaking raft apart, drowning voices in salt. In that instant a lineage is gone, no descendants, no memory, only silence. And yet, without these attempts, without this willingness to place everything upon the water's mercy, humanity would never have left Africa. The gamble of the sea was not optional. It was the price of expansion, the toll demanded by the ocean before it would open its far shore. What makes this gamble so haunting is its scale. On land, a tribe might wander into the desert and perish, but another could try again along a different path. The desert, vast though it was, offered multiple chances, multiple routes. The sea was less forgiving. Here, failure was absolute. A raft overturned left no trace. The ocean swallowed bones without a word. There was no marker, no cairn, no abandoned fire pit to tell of the attempt. The water erased as surely as it tested. And still they tried, perhaps because they had learned to read the sea as they once read the savannah, the color of water changing with depth, the way seabirds wheeled overhead, the driftwood washed ashore hinting at land beyond sight. These signs became their guides, fragile as they were. Perhaps it was enough to give them courage, or at least to let them believe courage was possible. Consider the magnitude of this step. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors had been creatures of land. Fire, tools, shelters, everything they made was bound to the earth, and now suddenly they entrusted themselves to something that moved beneath them, something alive and unpredictable. This was not only a physical crossing, it was a leap of imagination. To trust water to carry you is to believe in what cannot be seen or touched. It is to accept that survival might rest on forces beyond your control. But what if those first crossings were not heroic but accidental? A storm sweeps through, lifting debris, logs lashed together by roots, carrying a few humans clinging desperately onto the current. Hours pass, and instead of drowning, they wash ashore on a new coast. Survivors stumble onto land, dazed, unaware that they have just altered the course of human history. Could our destiny beyond Africa have been written not by courage, but by accident, by the chaos of waves? Speculation lingers, but what remains certain is this: the gamble was real. Archaeological evidence shows that by 70,000 years ago, humans were present on the Arabian Peninsula, their tools scattered across ancient riverbeds. This means the crossing succeeded, not once but enough times to seed populations that would endure. And yet, genetics tells us the line was thin. Only a handful of these groups survived long enough to leave lasting descendants. The rest most likely were erased by sea, by desert, by famine. Close your eyes and picture that thinness. Picture the moment when a single raft carried not only its passengers, but the weight of every future life. If it sank, all those lives vanished before they began. If it reached the far shore, then you, sitting here tonight, are part of its legacy. That is the scale of this gamble. The breath you take now may trace back to a raft rocking on waves 70,000 years ago. There is something profoundly humbling in this. We often imagine the spread of humanity as inevitable, as though it was destiny carved into the world. But here, at the gate of tears, inevitability vanished. What remained was chance, fragile and uncertain. One storm too many, one crossing too few, and the story could have ended differently. Perhaps humanity would have remained small, bound forever to Africa. Perhaps the world beyond would have belonged to others. And yet, against the odds, a few crossings succeeded. Perhaps they found calm seas, the moon pulling tides in their favor. Perhaps they lashed rafts tighter, learning with each failure. Perhaps sheer luck carried them. Whatever the reason, they made it, and with them came the seed of humanity's future spread. The gamble of the sea did more than carry bodies across water. It reshaped how humans thought. Once the sea was crossed, the world expanded. Islands were no longer boundaries, but opportunities. Shores became doorways. The horizon, once feared, became a challenge. This was the beginning of humanity as a seafaring species, though it would take tens of thousands of years to fully flower. The first step was here, fragile, uncertain, and yet enough. So much of our story rests on these moments, the times when risk outweighed safety, when chance decided survival. The gamble of the sea was one of the greatest of them all. Every storm that passed over the Bab el-Mandeb could have erased us. Every calm morning that followed could have carried us forward. The difference between extinction and expansion was measured in waves and wind. Even now, when ships cross oceans with ease, when satellites trace every current, we carry that memory. The unease we feel in storms, the awe we feel before the horizon, these may be echoes of those first crossings, when everything was at stake. The sea remains both a danger and a promise, as it was then. And so, the gamble of the sea was not only about leaving Africa. It was about becoming something more. A species that could trust itself to water, that could risk everything for a shore unseen. Without that gamble, there would be no us. With it, the world opened. The world our ancestors stepped into was not the one we know today. It was colder, harsher, and more unstable. A planet gripped by cycles of ice that advanced and retreated like the tides of a cosmic ocean. Great glaciers covered continents. vast rivers of frozen water grinding across land, carving valleys and leaving behind scars that remain visible even now. These were the ice ages, and for early humans, they were both a prison and a path. Imagine standing on a windswept plain as the air stings your face with bitter cold. To the north, the horizon is blocked not by mountains but by a wall of ice, stretching farther than the eye can see. It groans and shifts with unimaginable weight, taller than the highest cliffs, alive with cracks that echo like thunder. This was the edge of the known world, an impassable frontier of frozen death. And yet, while ice closed doors, it also opened them. As glaciers expanded, they locked away the planet's water, pulling it from the oceans and trapping it in frozen sheets. Sea levels fell, sometimes by more than 100 meters. Where waves once rolled, land appeared, new coasts stretched outward, and land bridges emerged, connecting regions that today are divided by water. For humanity, these changes were not just geological curiosities, they were lifelines. Picture the map of that world. Between Siberia and Alaska lay a vast expanse of tundra, the Bering Land Bridge, broad enough to support herds of mammoth and bison, and wide enough for humans to follow. Between Britain and mainland Europe, the sea floor lay exposed, a grassy plain, where rivers cut channels and animals grazed. Across Southeast Asia, islands were fused together into larger masses, their coastlines swollen outward. Each of these bridges offered routes where once there had been seas, corridors of survival carved by cold. But these corridors were not permanent. The ice advanced and retreated in cycles, reshaping the land with every shift. To be born in one generation might mean a world of open pathways. To be born in another might mean those same routes were drowned by rising seas. Migration was dictated not by choice alone, but by climate's rhythm, a rhythm far beyond human control. For those who walked the Ice Age world, adaptation was constant. Imagine moving through landscapes that transformed within a lifetime. A valley once fertile with grasslands could become tundra within decades. Rivers might freeze for years, then flood with sudden melt. Food sources shifted with the seasons, and entire ecosystems vanished as glaciers advanced. Humans could not resist these forces, they could only follow, and yet in following they spread. Herds of reindeer, mammoth, and aurochs moved along the edges of ice, seeking pastures that survived the cold. Hunters followed the herds, step by step, carrying with them fire, tools, and memory. Migration was not only about curiosity or desperation, it was about tracking the rhythms of life itself, rhythms set by the turning of the Earth's axis and the breath of glaciers. Think of what this demanded: clothing stitched from hides, insulated with furs, fires tended constantly, for a night without flame meant death, tools adapted for scraping fat, cracking frozen bones, and shaping shelters from snow or wood. To survive in the Ice Age world was to invent, to innovate, to pass knowledge forward like fire from hand to hand. But survival was never guaranteed, the cold claimed many. Burials from this time show bodies wrapped in care, but also in scarcity. Children, hunters, elders, all cut short by hunger, exposure, or disease. And yet, even in death, there is evidence of resilience. Tools buried with the fallen, ochre spread across bones, a sign of ritual, of memory. In the harshest climates, humanity not only endured but created meaning. The Ice Age was not only an obstacle, it was a shaper of destiny. It dictated the routes by which humans spread into Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas. Without lowered seas, the Bering Land Bridge would never have existed. Without glaciers, coastlines would never have stretched outward, offering new hunting grounds. The very shape of human history is carved into the ice. And what if the ice had not come? What if the world had remained warm, seas high, coastlines narrow? Would humanity have spread as far, as fast? Or would we have remained clustered in pockets, separated by waters we could not yet cross? Perhaps the ice ages, brutal as they were, gave us the pathways we needed at the exact moments we needed them. Close your eyes and imagine walking across one of those exposed plains. The sea far to the horizon, the air sharp with salt and cold. You are crossing a land that will one day vanish beneath waves, a road built by ice and erased by time. You do not know this, of course. You only know that the herd moves ahead, that survival waits beyond, and so you walk, carrying the weight of a future you cannot imagine. The Ice Age world was unforgiving, but it was also full of possibility. Every glacier that fell back revealed new lands. Every frozen sea lowered opened new roads. Humanity did not master the ice, but it learned to follow it, to read its patterns, to seize the moments when doors opened. In this way, the glaciers were both barriers and guides. They reminded humans of their fragility, but they also showed the routes by which they could escape that fragility. The world itself was alive, shifting, resisting, and yet, for those willing to endure, offering a path. The story of migration is not only about choice, it is also about the vast forces of earth and sky, of ice and sea, shaping the roads beneath our feet. And in the Ice Age world, those forces decided who would move, where they would go, and whether they would survive. To walk the Ice Age world was to wander across a living map that shifted beneath your feet. Mountains rose and fell, seas advanced and withdrew, rivers carved new valleys while old ones dried into dust. Every journey was not just a test of endurance, but a wager against the earth itself. Each step forward was a roll of the dice, and the odds were rarely in humanity's favor. Imagine tracing your path by landmarks, an oak grove here, a river bend there, only to return a season later and find the river diverted, the grove buried beneath silt. In the deep cold, glaciers ground across the land, pushing soil into ridges and leaving behind scarred plains. Earth was not stable. It shifted and resisted, as though it meant to keep its secrets hidden. For humans, this instability meant every migration was provisional. A route that led to safety one year might lead to death the next. A valley rich with herds could become barren when the ice advanced. A coastal plain that carried life might vanish beneath the tide when the ice retreated. Maps, if they existed, would never have lasted long, for the land itself was unfaithful. And yet people kept moving. Why? Because to stay meant stagnation, and stagnation meant vulnerability. Imagine a small group that discovers a fertile plain revealed by retreating ice. For a few generations it sustains them. But then the climate shifts, the plain floods, or freezes, or dries. They are forced to move again, retracing steps, gambling on new paths. In this way, migration was not a single event, but an endless negotiation with a restless planet. What if we consider Earth not as a stage upon which humanity acted, but as an active force, a character in the story, shaping, resisting, challenging? The glaciers, the deserts, the shifting seas, all of them tested humanity's will to spread. It is tempting to imagine that the world itself did not want us to succeed, that each barrier was a gate, demanding payment in lives before it opened. Consider the Bering Land Bridge. At times it was wide and fertile, a grassland stretching between Asia and North America. Herds of mammoth and bison crossed it, and humans followed. But when the ice melted, the bridge sank beneath the sea, closing the road behind them. Those who had crossed were cut off forever, forced to build lives in lands from which they could never return. The earth allowed them through, but only once. The same was true in Europe. During warm periods, forests spread, filling valleys with game and shelter. But in colder swings, ice advanced, forcing humans southward into crowded refuges, where tribes clashed over scarce land. Some groups vanished in these bottlenecks, erased not by battle alone, but by the narrowing of Earth's habitable zones. The map itself had turned against them. Close your eyes and imagine the uncertainty of such a world. To wake each morning knowing that the land itself could change beneath you. To follow a herd across a plain, only to find yourself trapped by floods when spring thaw came. To carry your children into a valley of promise, only to find it barren when the winds shifted. Every choice was a gamble, every direction a risk. And yet, perhaps this constant peril was also our forge. What if it was the unpredictability itself that shaped the human mind into something restless, adaptive, and resilient? A stable world might have bred complacency, but a shifting world demanded imagination. To survive, one had to envision possibilities beyond the present, to anticipate, to plan, to hope. Migration was not only movement, it was foresight turned into action. Archaeological traces bear this out. Campsites abandoned and reoccupied across millennia, showing groups returning when climates shifted in their favor. Tools adapted again and again to new conditions. Stone points reshaped, shelters altered, clothing improved. This was not a people merely enduring the world, but a people negotiating with it, learning its rhythms and preparing for its turns. Still, the cost was staggering. For every group that found safety, many did not. Lineages blinked out like sparks carried away by wind. Entire branches of humanity, unknown cousins, forgotten tribes, vanished in the cold silence of shifting earth. We carry only fragments of their legacy in our genes, faint whispers of failed journeys, ghost populations erased by chance. Speculate for a moment. What if the dice had rolled differently? What if the glaciers had advanced farther, cutting off routes entirely? What if a sea had risen sooner, drowning a passage before it was crossed? What if the winds had shifted just enough to starve one small band, the band that happened to carry the ancestors of us all? Perhaps humanity's spread was not inevitable, but precarious, a fragile dance balanced on the edge of climate and chance. And yet, somehow, enough paths opened, enough bridges held, enough plains blossomed green before they froze again. It was never guaranteed, but always possible, and possibility was enough for humans to try. Again and again they rolled the dice, even when the world seemed to conspire against them. There is a quiet awe in realizing this, that every continent we inhabit today was reached not by certainty but by risk, that the map of our world was not given but one, each step contested by ice, sea, and stone. The earth resisted us, and yet we persisted. The Ice Age world reminds us that migration was never a smooth line, but a jagged path, opening and closing with climate's breath. Each journey was a gamble against shifting earth, and only the lucky few succeeded, but those few carried with them all of us, every future life, every story yet to be told. When the first humans crossed deserts and seas, they must have imagined they were walking into empty lands, places untouched, waiting to be claimed. But the truth was different. The world beyond Africa was not empty. It was already inhabited. And what our ancestors found were not beasts, nor strangers so alien they could not be recognized, but others like themselves. Other kinds of humans, with fire in their eyes, strength in their arms, and deep roots in the lands they called home. The first to be encountered were the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years, they had lived across Europe and Western Asia, Enduring the cold of Ice Age steppes and forests, their bodies were powerful, their bones thick and dense, their muscles strong enough to endure a life of endless labor. Imagine meeting one, a figure shorter but broader than you, with a heavy brow and eyes that glint in the firelight. Their hands are scarred from work, their movements purposeful, their presence undeniable. These were no beasts, these were people. But Neanderthals were not the only ones. Farther east lived the Denisovans, a mysterious branch of humanity whose bones are so rare that we know them mostly through DNA. They left traces in the mountains of Siberia and whispers in the bloodlines of modern people in Asia and Oceania. And there were others too, shadows on the edge of history, smaller humans like Homo floresiensis in Indonesia, sometimes called the hobbits, and perhaps even more yet undiscovered. The truth is simple. When Homo sapiens left Africa, we were not alone. What did those first encounters look like? Picture a small band of humans moving through a forest valley. Smoke rises in the distance. They creep closer and see figures around a fire. Figures that look almost like them, but not quite. Stronger, broader. Faces unfamiliar, yet uncannily human. In that moment, what do they feel? Fear? Curiosity? The urge to flee, or the urge to approach? Archaeology and genetics suggest that the encounters went both ways. There was conflict, no doubt. Evidence of violence exists, broken skulls, wounds that tell of clashes between groups. Competition for land, for food, for water must have been fierce. Imagine two tribes meeting at the mouth of a cave, both needing its shelter as winter approaches. Words may have been exchanged, gestures made, but in the end, one group was driven off, or killed, or absorbed, and yet there was also connection. When scientists look into our DNA today, they find fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry woven into us all. This means there was not only battle, but interbreeding. Children born of encounters that blurred the lines between us and them. These unions may have been rare, but they were enough to leave a legacy that endures in our very blood. Think about that. If you trace your ancestry back far enough, you may carry echoes of a Neanderthal's gaze, or a Denisovan's hands, or traits shaped by unions that took place in caves and forests tens of thousands of years ago. Our story is not pure. It is entangled, a braid of lineages interwoven in ways we can only imagine. Speculate for a moment. What might those relationships have been like? Were they moments of violence, women taken as spoils and raids? Were they acts of alliance, bonds formed between groups for survival? Or were they something more human still? Curiosity, attraction, recognition of sameness across difference? We cannot know for certain, but what we do know is that the mingling happened and its traces remain in us. But the encounters were not equal. Over time, Neanderthals and Denisovans dwindled, their numbers falling even as Homo sapiens grew. Why? Perhaps climate shifts struck them harder. Perhaps they were too rooted to adapt quickly when environments changed, or perhaps competition with us, lighter, more mobile, more numerous, was simply too much. Slowly they faded from the world, leaving only echoes in our DNA and tools in the soil. Yet we should not imagine them as failures. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals thrived in environments where our species had not yet dared to go. They hunted mammoth on frozen steppes, survived winters that would have crushed us, crafted tools and ornaments of their own. They were not defeated easily. Their disappearance was not a sign of weakness, but of how fragile survival was in that world, even for the strongest. Close your eyes and picture a meeting of two fires on a cold plain. Around one sit Neanderthals, their voices low, their gestures firm. Around the other, Homo sapiens, eyes fixed, wary, curious. Between them lies a space filled with tension and possibility. Perhaps they share food. Perhaps they share words, if words could bridge the gap. Or perhaps they share only a glance before one group vanishes into the night. These were the first meetings of peoples, and they shaped us forever. The lands beyond Africa were not waiting to be filled. They were already contested, already alive with other humans who claimed them. To spread was not just to walk farther, but to enter into rivalry with those who had walked there before. Every new valley, every cave, every riverbank was not simply found, it was taken, negotiated, or fought for. And yet, in this contest, something extraordinary happened. Humanity did not remain separate tribes divided forever. Instead, pieces merged, trades blended, legacies overlapped. The result is us, creatures of mixed blood, carrying in our bodies the traces of every rival we encountered. The story of the Exodus is not only one of survival against deserts, seas, and ice. It is also a story of meeting others, of conflict and union, of loss and inheritance. To step beyond Africa was to enter not empty lands, but a crowded stage, and to carve a place that meant both fighting and embracing those who were already part of the human family. The world beyond Africa was not empty. It was filled with rivals, with kin, with echoes of ourselves, and in meeting them, we became something more than we had been before. Every step beyond Africa was contested, each valley, each river crossing, each cave with a roof of stone. None of these places were empty. They were claimed, defended, lived in by others who had been there long before Homo sapiens arrived. To spread into these lands meant more than braving climate and hunger. It meant facing rivals who were as human as we were. The Exodus, in this sense, was not just a migration, it was a trial by fire. Imagine arriving at a valley rimmed with forests, game plentiful, water flowing clear from a spring. To your small band, weary from travel, it feels like salvation, but as night falls, you see another fire in the distance, shadows moving around it, voices carried on the wind. You are not alone. Do you approach in peace? Do you wait and watch? Or do you prepare for battle? For Neanderthals and Denisovans, these encounters must have been equally charged. For them, it was we who were the invaders, pressing into territories they had known for hundreds of generations. To them, Homo sapiens were not pioneers, but intruders. And when intruders arrive, choices are limited. Resist, absorb, or perish. Archaeological traces suggest all three happened. There are signs of violence, fractured skulls, defensive wounds, evidence of conflict at sites where groups overlapped. The land was finite, and food was never abundant enough for peace to last long. Yet there is also DNA evidence, proof that some encounters ended not with death but with union, children born of mixed bloodlines. Survival was not always about defeating rivals. Sometimes it was about becoming them, and letting them become part of us. But even when blood was mingled, the contest remained. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens lived alongside Neanderthals in Europe and alongside Denisovans in Asia. In those millennia, they hunted the same herds, gathered the same plants, sought shelter in the same caves. Competition was unavoidable. Imagine two bands of hunters arriving at the same herd of mammoth. Arrows fly, spears thrust, the animal brought down. But who claims the kill? For every cooperation, there must have been moments when steel eyes met across firelight, hands tightened on weapons, and silence broke into struggle. Speculate for a moment. Perhaps this was the crucible that sharpened us. In Africa, we had faced predators and climate, but beyond it we faced ourselves in other forms. rivals with minds as keen, hands as skilled, and survival as desperate as ours. To endure against them required more than strength. It demanded innovation, strategy, alliances, and perhaps even cruelty. The Exodus was as much a war as it was a wandering. Some scientists wonder whether it was our numbers, our adaptability, or even our social bonds that gave us the edge. Neanderthals were powerful, but their populations were scattered, their groups small. Denisovans were elusive, perhaps isolated in highlands and mountains. We, by contrast, seemed to carry a restlessness that never stopped moving, a drive that filled valleys before rivals could recover. And with each expansion, the old inhabitants dwindled. Yet the story is not only of conquest, it is also of absorption. Today, in every breath you take, there may be fragments of those rivals lingering in your body. Genes that help regulate your immune system, traits that once gave Neanderthals strength in the cold, Denisovan DNA that aids survival at high altitudes. These are not trophies of victory. They are inheritances, reminders that we did not erase our rivals entirely. We carried them with us, woven into ourselves. Still, the broader truth remains. By 30,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were gone. By even earlier, the Denisovans too had faded. What was left was us. Did we outthink them, outfight them, or did the dice of survival simply fall in our favor? Perhaps it was not one cause but many. Conflict, climate, competition, all converging in ways that allowed one species to endure while others slipped into memory. Close your eyes and imagine those final days of coexistence. A valley where Neanderthal hunters returned to find their caves occupied by strangers with light frames and sharper tools. A mountain pass where Denisovan herders see unfamiliar figures moving along the ridges, spreading into lands they once held. The rivals do not vanish overnight. They dwindle step by step, year by year, until the fires that once marked their camps go dark. The trial by fire was not glorious. It was slow, brutal, intimate. It was not fought with armies, but with families, tribes, and chance encounters. Each conflict left scars, each union left children, and each disappearance left silence. This was the price of the Exodus, not only to survive deserts and seas, but to survive each other, and perhaps that is the lesson. Migration is never only about movement through space. It is about negotiation of power, the testing of boundaries, the collision of lives. Our ancestors spread not into empty maps, but into a world alive with others. And by fire, by union, by absorption, and by conquest, they made space for themselves. The Exodus was never peaceful. It was a struggle, a trial by fire, and it forged us into what we are. Once the first sparks of humanity carried beyond Africa, and through encounters with rivals, another challenge stretched before them, not other people but the landscapes themselves. To the east lay deserts without mercy, plains so vast they seemed endless, and mountains so high they touched the sky. Each of these regions was a crucible, testing not only bodies, but the spirit of every small band who dared to cross. The first barrier was Arabia, a land of blistering heat and scarce water. Its deserts, much like the Sahara, were shifting and unpredictable, sometimes blooming in wet phases, sometimes collapsing into dust. Imagine walking under its sun, the ground cracking beneath your feet, the horizon wavering with mirages. Waterholes might vanish overnight, and without them, survival could end in days. Archaeological sites in Arabia reveal stone tools scattered like breadcrumbs across ancient riverbeds and caves, proof that humans entered again and again in fragile waves. Yet many of these traces end abruptly, suggesting that groups failed to endure. Arabia was not a land that welcomed them. It was a gate that opened only for a moment, then slammed shut again. Those who pressed farther found themselves on the steppes of Central Asia, an ocean of grass stretching to the horizon. Here the danger was not thirst but exposure. Winters plunged into lethal cold, winds howling without shelter. A fire left untended could vanish in seconds. A child without furs could perish in a single night. To walk across the steppes was to place trust in mobility, following herds, building shelters from bones and hides, carrying knowledge of survival etched into memory. And then, towering over the horizon, rose the Himalayas, the roof of the world. Imagine small bands of humans looking up at peaks lost in cloud, glaciers glistening under thin air. For them, every breath was a struggle, the oxygen too scarce for comfort, the cold sliced through skin and bone. Yet archaeological evidence tells us that even here humans left traces. Caves high in the Tibetan plateau carry signs of occupation, and DNA shows that interbreeding with Denisovans may have gifted us with adaptations for high-altitude survival. To reach these heights was not only endurance, it was inheritance, survival written into blood. Speculate for a moment on what it must have felt like to walk into a desert where bones of your kin already lay, to cross grasslands so wide you could travel for weeks without seeing the end, to stand on a mountain where the air itself seemed to resist you. These were not landscapes that embraced humanity. They were landscapes that pushed back, demanding payment in lives for every step. And payment was made. For every group that pressed forward, dozens must have perished. Lineages ended quietly in caves where the fire went out, on plains where hunger gnawed, on slopes where lungs gave way to thin air. Archaeology offers fragments, abandoned tools, campsites left unfinished, skeletons sealed in earth. Each one whispers of journeys that failed. But the story is not only of failure. Some survived, some endured. Each time a group crossed and lived, they left seeds behind, small populations scattered like embers across vast lands. These were fragile, staggered waves, not one great flood but countless trickles. Together, over tens of thousands of years, they spread into every corner of Asia. What allowed them to endure? Perhaps it was technology, stone points that brought down game, fire that softened the cold, hides stitched into clothing. Perhaps it was memory, stories told around the fire of where water could be found, where grass grew thick, where storms passed quickly. Or perhaps it was the same restlessness that had driven them from Africa, an unwillingness to stop even when the land itself resisted. Close your eyes and imagine walking with them. The desert sand crunches beneath your feet, lips cracked with thirst. The steppe wind cuts your face, endless grass bending under the weight of storms. The mountain air burns, your lungs each breath shallow, each step slow. Around you the small band struggles, but they do not stop. Ahead lies only more distance, more danger, and yet also the promise of survival, of a life beyond the horizon. The east was harsh, but it was also possibility. Every desert crossed, every step endured, every mountain climbed, widened humanity's map. Each fragmentary success added another thread to the tapestry, pulling our species outward, farther, deeper into the unknown. The road into the east was not a straight line, nor was it inevitable. It was a fragile scattering of lives, most extinguished, some enduring. But it was enough. From these staggered waves, humanity spread into lands no one could have imagined when the first feet pressed into African soil. To walk into the east was to enter a road with no end in sight. Not a single journey, but thousands of journeys stretched across generations, each step carrying humans farther into a world vast beyond comprehension. The desert was one trial, the steppe another, the mountains yet another, but the greatest challenge was distance itself. The land simply did not stop. Imagine the scale. From the shores of Arabia to the edges of China stretches thousands of miles of plains, deserts, and forests. Beyond that, the mountains of Siberia, the frozen rivers, the tundra rolling into the horizon. To a band of a few dozen, carrying fire and memory alone, this was an endless road. Every step forward meant greater separation from the cradle of their kind, fewer ties to those who had come before, less chance of turning back. And yet they walked. What kept them moving? Perhaps hunger again, as herds shifted eastward. Perhaps curiosity, the pull of the unknown. But there is another possibility. Perhaps it was simply momentum. Once begun, the road carried them on, generation by generation. A tribe might settle for a time by a river, build fires there, raise children, but in a few decades scarcity would come again. Drought, cold, or conflict would push them onward. And so the pattern repeated, a rhythm of movement, scattering, survival. The cost was immense. For every group that endured, dozens vanished into the silence of distance. Some fell to hunger, unable to find food across barren stretches. Others froze in winters they had not prepared for. Still others dwindled slowly, their numbers too small to sustain themselves. Archaeological traces bear witness. Tools scattered far from settlements, skeletons left in shallow graves, sites abandoned after only a season or two. Each is the echo of a lineage cut short. Speculate for a moment. What if the road itself was the great filter of humanity? Not the desert, not the sea, not even the rivals we faced, but the sheer length of the path. To move too far was to risk isolation, to sever ties with others, to gamble that your small band could hold together across endless miles. Most failed, but a few did not, and those few carried the story onward. Think of what distance does to memory. After weeks of travel, a tribe forgets the landmarks of its old home. After years, the stories grow hazy. After generations, the land of their ancestors is no more than a myth, a place beyond the horizon. By the time they reach new lands, they are no longer a people leaving Africa. They are simply people of the road, defined not by where they began, but by how far they have gone. Yet distance also shapes resilience. The farther a group traveled, the more they had to innovate. Fires needed to be kept alive through storms, hides stitched into warmer clothing, shelters built from new materials. Languages diverged, stories shifted, traditions adapted to new climates. The endless road did not only test survival, it shaped identity. Every mile carried humanity farther, not only in space but in mind. Close your eyes and picture one of those long marches. The horizon stretches flat, the wind cutting cold, the earth hard beneath tired feet. Children cry, elders stumble, but the band moves on, driven by need. At night they huddle under stars that seem both familiar and strange. Some look back, longing for lands they can no longer reach. Others look forward, dreaming of valleys yet unseen. The road consumes them all, but it also carries them into futures no one else could imagine. And what of those who did not survive? Their stories are unwritten, their lives unremembered, yet perhaps they are not entirely gone. In the genes of survivors, in fragments of tools reused by later bands, and the faint echoes of traditions passed down unknowingly, their presence lingers. The endless road was littered with failure, but even failure left traces, shaping the few who continued. It is humbling to realize how fragile it all was. Each success was balanced on the edge of countless losses. If one small band had stumbled in the wrong season, if one fire had gone out at the wrong moment, if one river had frozen too soon, then the line might have ended. The map of humanity would have been smaller, the world less filled with us. The fact that you breathe now is proof that at least one group endured, while dozens of others did not. Speculate further. What if those other lineages had survived instead? What if the tribes that vanished in the deserts of Arabia or the forests of Central Asia had thrived while ours failed? Would the humans alive today be different, shaped by other genes, other stories, other traditions? The endless road reminds us that history is not inevitable. It is fragile, contingent, written by chance as much as by will. And yet, for all its fragility, the road never ended. With each small success, humanity crept farther east. Step by step, fire by fire, the map widened. What seemed impossible, a species spreading across deserts, plains, and mountains, became reality through persistence. It was not destiny that carried us, but the refusal to stop walking. The endless road is still with us. You can feel it in the air, restlessness that stirs when you look to a horizon, in the desire to move when life feels confined. It is the memory of distance, the inheritance of countless journeys, most of them lost to silence. The road consumed our ancestors, but it also defined them. Without it, there would be no us. 65,000 years ago, the endless road carried humanity to a place where land itself seemed to vanish. Beyond the forests of Southeast Asia, the earth broke apart into a chain of islands, separated by stretches of water too wide to see across. The journey that had begun with fire and stone now met a new frontier, the sea, not as a narrow strait, but as an open expanse. And it was here that humans made one of their boldest leaps, the crossing into Australia. Imagine the world then. Sea levels were lower, coastlines stretched farther out, and islands lay closer together. Yet even in those conditions, water still separated Asia from Sahul, the great landmass that once connected Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania. To reach it required more than swimming or drifting. It required intent. Boats had to be built, rafts lashed together, paths across the islands mapped. This was not a crossing of accident, but of planning, navigation, and risk. Picture a small group standing at the edge of an island, staring across the horizon where the sea glitters endless. They cannot see the far shore, only the faint outline of another island, low and green. Behind them, resources are thinning, game hunted, fruit gathered, rivers drained by too many mouths. Ahead lies uncertainty, but someone begins to cut wood, to strip vines, to bind reeds into bundles. Fire hardens the points of poles that will push against currents. Slowly, the pieces of a vessel take shape. This moment was unprecedented. For the first time, humans were not merely crossing what they could see. They were setting out into waters that hid the destination from sight. To do so required imagination, the ability to believe that something existed beyond the horizon, even when eyes could not confirm it. It also required trust, not just in the sea but in each other. To climb aboard a fragile raft or canoe was to place your life in the hands of those who built it and in the courage of those who steered it forward. Archaeological evidence confirms they succeeded. Sites in northern Australia show human presence as far back as 65,000 years ago, long before most other parts of the world had seen our kind. Stone tools, hearths, and ochre used for painting testified to people not only surviving but thriving. Their arrival was not accidental drift, it was a leap of intent, carried by boats over waters that had never before been crossed by human hands. Speculate on what that voyage must have been like. The sea swelling beneath them, stars wheeling above, wind filling their lungs with salt. Days of paddling or poling, hands blistered, muscles burning. Nights of fear as waves rocked the raft, children crying, adults whispering reassurance. The horizon empty, then filled with cloud, then empty again, until finally land, green, alive, salvation. To set foot on that shore was to enter a continent no human had ever seen, a land of new skies, new creatures, new dangers. Australia itself was another crucible. Its landscapes were unlike any the migrants had known. Dry deserts in the interior, rainforests on the coasts, strange animals bounding on powerful legs, birds with calls unlike any in Africa or Asia. Giant marsupials roamed then, creatures twice the size of kangaroos, flightless birds taller than a man, lizards as long as a car. To face these was to rewrite survival once again, learning which plants nourished and which poisoned, which beasts could be hunted and which avoided. And yet the humans adapted. Within a few generations they spread across the continent, leaving traces of fires, tools, and rock art that still whispers of their presence. This leap into Australia was more than geographical. It was cognitive. It showed that humanity had crossed a threshold of imagination. The first Red Sea crossing had been a test of chance, narrow and treacherous, but this was something greater, a deliberate push into the unknown, requiring foresight, planning, and trust in possibilities that could not be seen. Without such leaps, there would have been no islands settled, no oceans crossed, no world spanned. Close your eyes and picture those first fires on Australian soil. The crackle of flame against dry wood, sparks rising into a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. Around it, faces lean close, weary from the sea but alive with wonder. Children laugh at creatures bounding in the distance. Elders speak softly, weaving stories of the crossing, of the water that tried to take them, and the land that welcomed them. In that moment, the leap is no longer just survival. It is memory, story, myth, and those myths endure still, carried in the dreamtime traditions of Australia's first peoples, echoes of journeys older than history. The Australian leap was not the last. It was the beginning of humanity's relationship with the sea as a path rather than a wall. From here, the pattern would repeat, across the Pacific, across the Atlantic, across every ocean on Earth. But it began with this daring step, when fragile boats carried fragile lives into waters unknown, and set them down in a world no human had ever seen. The sea, once feared, became a road again, and on that road humanity proved that no barrier was final, not deserts, not ice, not distance, not even oceans. To cross into Australia was to do more than travel. It was to wager everything on faith. Faith that the world was larger than it seemed, faith that beyond the endless horizon there might be land, food, and life. No maps marked the way, no stars had been charted, no one had ever returned to describe what lay ahead. These journeys were blind leaps into a void, and yet, against all odds, they succeeded. Picture the moment before departure. The boats, woven from reeds, lashed from logs, or carved from great trunks, are pulled to the shore. Fires burn low, embers saved for the crossing. Around them, men and women gather, faces drawn with fear and determination. They do not know what lies beyond the line where sea meets sky. They cannot see the far shore. And yet they step aboard. Children are lifted into boats, supplies stacked, paddles carved. The decision has been made, to trust the unknown. What courage this required! On land, even in deserts and mountains, the horizon was always reachable. One could turn back, retrace steps, find familiar ground. But on the sea there was no turning back. Once currents caught the boat, Once distance swallowed the shore behind, retreat was impossible. It was forward or nothing. Imagine the silence as they left shore, the waves slapping against wood, the cries of gulls fading as the coast shrank. The world became water and sky, no longer earth. Day after day the sun burned down, blistering skin, blinding eyes. Night after night the stars wheeled above, vast and indifferent. Hunger gnawed, water grew scarce, storms threatened to overturn everything, and yet they pressed onward. What compelled them? Was it desperation, driven from their lands by famine or conflict? Was it curiosity, the same restless drive that had carried them across deserts and steppes? Or was it something deeper still, an instinct not only to move, but to seek what could not be seen, to trust in possibilities invisible to the eye? Speculation lingers. Some scientists suggest the crossing to Australia may have required coordination between groups, planning across entire bands of people. Rafts may have set out together, fleets rather than single vessels, ensuring that even if some failed, others would succeed. If true, this was not just courage, it was cooperation on a scale unseen before. It meant communication, planning, leadership. It meant vision. Consider the moment of first sighting. After days adrift, the horizon breaks, a dark line against the sea, growing larger, greener, sharper, land. The cry goes up, voices trembling with relief. Paddles strike the water with renewed strength. Rafts creak forward. When feet finally touch sand, tears fall, laughter erupts. Prayers are whispered to whatever spirits may have guided them. They have reached the unknown and made it theirs. But think also of those who did not succeed. For every boat that landed, how many vanished? Storms sweeping across the ocean, rafts broken to pieces, survivors swallowed by waves. No trace left, no bones to be found, no story to be told. Entire lineages may have ended on those waters. The courage of the unknown was always a gamble, and the ocean claimed its share of lives. And yet the gamble was worth it. Those who survived carried humanity into a new world. Australia became not just a continent, but a testament to imagination itself. It proved that humans were capable of more than instinctual wandering. They could conceive of journeys into emptiness, journeys whose success could not be guaranteed. They could trust themselves to the unknown. Close your eyes and imagine the first night on Australian soil. A fire crackles on the beach, sparks carried into the salt air. The sea roars behind, a reminder of the peril crossed. Children sleep against their mothers. The elders sit in silence. The young speak in hushed voices. Above them new constellations blaze, patterns no one in Africa or Asia had ever seen. And in that moment, perhaps, the first stories of the crossing were told. Stories not only of survival, but of courage, of daring to leave sight of land, to step into the void, and to return alive. Those stories may live still, faintly echoed in the dreamtime traditions of Australia's first peoples, where journeys across water and connections between lands are woven into myth. The memory of the leap endures, not only in archaeology and genetics, but in culture and imagination. The courage of the unknown was not only about boats and oceans, it was about redefining what it meant to be human. For the first time, our ancestors proved they could go where no path existed, trusting not in what they saw, but in what they believed might lie ahead. This courage is the thread that would later carry humanity across every sea, to every island, to the farthest edges of the earth. The ocean was vast, merciless, indifferent, but with courage it was crossed, and once crossed, it ceased to be a boundary. It became part of the human world, woven into story, memory, and destiny. The leap across oceans carried humanity into Australia, but another frontier lay to the northwest, one that would prove equally formidable: Europe during the Ice Age. Here the land itself was hostile, the air thick with cold, the ground frozen for months on end. This was not a place that welcomed newcomers. It was a crucible of frost and fire, where only the hardiest could endure. Picture the landscape: glaciers descending like white mountains, rivers locked in ice, plains swept by blizzards that howled without end. The sun hung weak in the sky, its light pale and fleeting. Trees stood twisted by frost, their branches bare for much of the year. Herds of mammoth and woolly rhinoceros trudged across the steppe, their great bodies wrapped in fur, while predators, saber-toothed cats, cave lions, dire wolves, stalked in their shadows. This was the stage upon which small bands of humans arrived, fragile sparks against the vastness of winter. For them, every day was survival balanced on the edge of extinction. Food was scarce, and to hunt was peril itself. Imagine a group of hunters trekking a mammoth through snow, spears heavy in their hands. The beast turns, trumpeting, its tusks gleaming with ice. A single misstep means death beneath its weight, yet without the kill the tribe will starve. Each hunt was a wager with survival, and each victory was temporary. The cold was a greater enemy still. Fire became not a luxury, but a heartbeat. Flames had to be tended without fail, for a single night without warmth could claim the young, the old, or the weak. Wood was gathered constantly, stored in caves, guarded as fiercely as food. Without fire, the Ice Age was death. With it life flickered, small, fragile, but enduring. Shelter was another trial. Caves offered refuge, but not safety. Their walls dripped with cold, their entrances open to predators. Yet within them humans carved out life. Fires crackled, smoke rose, and on the walls they painted images of horses, aurochs, deer. Perhaps these paintings were prayers, perhaps memory, perhaps a way to claim presence against the vast indifference of the ice. Whatever their purpose, they remain today, silent witnesses to the struggle. And then there were the rivals. Europe was Neanderthal land long before Homo sapiens arrived. For hundreds of thousands of years, they had endured these conditions, bodies shaped by the cold, minds sharpened by survival. To meet them was to confront not just another species, but another humanity, one strong, skilled, and deeply rooted. Some encounters may have ended in trade or shared fires, but many must have ended in conflict. Caves contested, hunting grounds fought over, survival negotiated in blood. Speculate for a moment. What would it have felt like to be one of those first Homo sapiens stepping into Neanderthal territory? To see figures like yourself, yet different, broader, stronger, eyes glinting with the same fire of intelligence. Were they enemies? Kin? Something in between? Perhaps in that moment, fear and awe mixed together, shaping every choice to fight or flee. The predators of Europe made the danger even sharper. A lion's roar echoing through the night could drive a tribe deeper into its cave, clutching weapons and children alike. A pack of wolves stalking a camp could steal food and lives in a single night. Humans were not yet the masters of this land. They were prey as much as hunter, fragile intruders in a world already claimed by beasts, and yet slowly they adapted. Furs were stitched into layered clothing. Spears were honed with sharper points, some tipped with stone blades that could pierce hides. Camps grew more organized, with fire pits, storage areas, and even rudimentary structures built from bones and hides. These were small defenses against vast dangers, but they mattered. Bit by bit, life in Ice Age Europe became survivable. Still, survival was never certain. Archaeological sites show evidence of small populations, scattered and fragile. A single harsh winter could wipe out an entire band. A disease carried through one campfire could end a lineage. The European challenge was relentless, unyielding. To endure it was to live always on the edge, knowing that any day could be the last. Close your eyes and imagine sitting in one of those caves. The fire crackles, shadows dance across painted walls. The smell of smoke and fur fills the air. Outside, the wind screams across frozen plains, carrying with it the distant cries of predators. Within, faces glow in the light, weary but alive. Songs are sung, stories told, memories preserved. Against the vast cold, these small acts are defiance, the refusal to vanish. Europe during the Ice Age was not conquered. It was endured. Every step, every fire, every painting on the wall was an act of survival against impossible odds. And though many failed, enough endured to leave a legacy. A legacy written not only in tools and bones, but in us, descendants of those who dared to face the cold and make it through. Europe was more than ice and predators. It was contested ground, a battlefield not of empires, but of small tribes and fragile fires. Here, survival was not only about enduring cold or hunting mammoth, it was about competition with those who had come before. For in these frozen valleys, Homo sapiens did not walk alone. They walked among Neanderthals, and for tens of thousands of years, Europe became the ultimate trial of who would endure and who would vanish. The Neanderthals were no mere obstacles. They were masters of this land, shaped by it, hardened by centuries of survival. Their bodies were broad and powerful, their hands skilled, their knowledge of the landscape deep. For hundreds of millennia, they had faced the glaciers and prevailed. To step into their world was to challenge not only the climate, but their claim to it. What followed was not a single war, but a long contest, tribe against tribe, fire against fire, generation after generation. Some encounters may have ended in wary exchange, a glance across a hunting ground, a quiet retreat to avoid conflict. Others, surely, ended in blood, a cave taken by force, a herd driven off, a band cornered in the snow. The archaeological record whispers of this: fractured skulls, abrupt abandonments of sites, the sudden replacement of Neanderthal tools with those of Homo sapiens. The story is not always written in bones, but in absences, in silences where once there was life. Yet the contest was not fought only with spears. It was fought with innovation. Homo sapiens brought tools of greater variety, blades finer, weapons lighter and deadlier. They brought networks too, bands connected over distance, sharing ideas, exchanging goods, carrying stories. Where Neanderthals were rooted, we were restless. Where they endured in small numbers, we multiplied. The contest was as much about adaptability as it was about strength. Speculate on what it felt like to be a Neanderthal hunter, standing on a ridge, watching smoke from another tribe's fire rising in the valley below, smoke that did not belong to your kin. To recognize that the land was no longer yours alone, that strangers had come with strange tools and strange tongues. Was there fear, resentment, or weary acceptance that the balance of survival was shifting? For the Homo sapiens, too, the encounters must have been charged with awe. To look upon others who were like them, yet different, broader faces, stronger arms, voices that echoed differently in caves, to see in them both kinship and rivalry. In such meetings, perhaps the line between enemy and ally blurred, for we know that blood was shared, children born of unions that bound the two peoples together, even as the broader contest continued, but competition has no mercy. The climate worsened, glaciers pressed southward, and resources dwindled. In those bottlenecks of survival, advantage mattered. A sharper spear, a larger band, a broader network, these could decide who lived and who did not. Slowly the balance tipped. Neanderthal numbers dwindled, their fires fewer, their voices fading. By 30,000 years ago, the last of them were gone. Europe was theirs no longer. Yet we should not see this as a simple story of conquest. The Neanderthals did not lose because they were weak. They endured longer in Europe than Homo sapiens had yet existed on Earth. Their disappearance was the outcome of chance, climate, and competition converging, a trial by fire in which survival was never guaranteed. In truth, their legacy did not vanish. It endures in us, in the fragments of their DNA carried in our blood, in the echoes of their resilience woven into our survival. Still, the contest for Europe shaped what humanity became. To endure here required more than tools or numbers. It demanded cooperation, imagination, and relentless adaptation. The paintings on cave walls, the carvings in bone, the ornaments buried with the dead, these were not luxuries. They were weapons of another kind: culture, memory, identity. They bound tribes together, gave meaning to survival, strengthened bonds when the cold and rivals pressed in. In the crucible of Europe, humanity became not just a species that endured, but a species that defined itself through story and symbol. Close your eyes and picture the final winters of Neanderthal Europe, a lone tribe huddled in a cave, their numbers few, their fire dim. Outside, another band camps nearby, their voices carrying in the wind voices of Homo sapiens, younger, more numerous, restless. The Neanderthals sit in silence, knowing the world is shifting, that the continent is no longer theirs. Perhaps they fought, perhaps they joined, perhaps they simply faded. Whatever the truth, the last of their kind slipped into history, leaving us as heirs to both their strength and their absence. Europe became the ultimate battlefield of survival, not only between humans and the elements, but between humans and each other. Out of that contest emerged a world where only one lineage remained, and that lineage was ours. Once Europe was endured, once Asia was crossed, and once the oceans had been tested, there remained one final landmass, unseen by human eyes. Beyond frozen seas and endless tundra, past horizons of snow and silence, lay a continent untouched. The Americas awaited, but they would not give themselves easily. To reach them, humanity would have to pass through one of the harshest gateways the world had ever set before us. The Bering Land Bridge, imagine it, the Ice Age at its height. Vast glaciers locked away so much water that oceans fell, exposing a plain between Siberia and Alaska. This land bridge, Beringia, was no narrow strip, but a sweeping expanse hundreds of miles wide. Rivers cut across it, grass and shrubs grew in places, and great herds of mammoth, bison, and caribou moved across its frozen breadth. For animals, it was a highway. For humans, it was both path and prison. To step onto Beringia was to enter a land of cold beyond anything Africa had known. Winds swept across the open plain, stripping warmth from the body in minutes. The ground was locked in permafrost, hard as stone. In summer, it thawed into sucking mud, bogging travelers down. In winter, it froze so solid that footsteps cracked like breaking bone. Food was scarce, found only in the herds and in the fleeting seasons when plants could be gathered. Picture a small band moving across this plain, their clothes stitched from hides, fur boots crunching in snow. Each breath hangs in the air like smoke. Fire is carried from camp to camp, never allowed to die. Children ride on shoulders, elders lean on staffs. Behind them lies Siberia, a land already stretched thin. Ahead lies only more tundra, endless and cold. And yet they press forward, for beyond Beringia waits a world no human has yet seen. But entry into this new world was not simple. The glaciers that covered much of North America formed walls of ice thousands of feet high, blocking passages south. For thousands of years, humans may have been trapped in Beringia, caught between Asia and the Americas, waiting for a chance to move. Archaeological evidence suggests this standstill, generations surviving in the Beringian refuge, holding on through scarcity until ice sheets retreated and corridors opened. Speculate for a moment on those long years. Entire lives lived on that frozen plain. Children born who would never see forests or grasslands, elders buried in ground too cold to dig, camps shifting with the seasons, following herds, scraping out survival in a land that offered little. What stories did they tell, these people of the in-between? Did they know that beyond the ice lay a continent? Or did they think the world ended at the glaciers, that the gods had set a wall no one could pass? And then, at last, the glaciers retreated. Corridors of land opened between the ice sheets, narrow but passable. Rivers flowed south, valleys spread wide, and the first small bands slipped through. Imagine their awe as they stepped out of frozen silence into new landscapes. Forests thick with life, plains rolling with game, rivers teeming with fish. For those who had endured the tundra of Beringia, this must have felt like paradise. What followed was one of the swiftest expansions in human history. Once the gateway opened, small groups spread rapidly, moving south through valleys and plains, their numbers multiplying as they went. Within a few thousand years, humans had reached the tip of South America, a journey across half the globe in the blink of an evolutionary eye. The Americas, untouched for so long, now echoed with human voices, fires, and footsteps. But the cost of that crossing must not be forgotten. For every group that made it through the ice, many perished in the attempt. Avalanches swept away camps. Starvation claimed bands caught in winters too long. Diseases spread quickly in close quarters, wiping out the weak. The glaciers did not open easily. They demanded lives for every mile. The bones of the lost still lie buried under permafrost and ice, silent witnesses to the price of the passage. Close your eyes and picture the first fires lit in the Americas. Flames rising against the dark, sparks carried into the night sky. Around them, faces lit with wonder, seeing animals and landscapes no human eyes had ever known. Giant ground sloths moving through forests, herds of horses racing across plains. The call of birds strange and new. In that moment, humanity had reached the last great frontier, completing a journey that had begun hundreds of thousands of years before in Africa. The Americas awaited, and now they had been found, but to claim them would require new struggles, against the land, against beasts, against the sheer scale of the continents themselves. Yet the first step had been taken, across the bridge of ice and earth, into a world that would one day become home to millions. The exodus was nearly complete, but the trials were not yet done. To step into the Americas was to step into the last chapter of the great exodus, the final reach of humanity's long march out of Africa. For hundreds of thousands of years, the journey had carried our kind across deserts, seas, mountains, and frozen plains. Now at last, there were no more continents waiting across the horizon. The Americas were the edge of the world, and yet reaching them was not an ending. It was a transformation. For here, in these vast new lands, humanity reshaped not only its destiny, but the fate of entire ecosystems. The arrival of humans in the Americas was unlike any other migration before. It was the moment when our species stepped into a world untouched by human hands and left it forever changed. Imagine the first small bands moving southward through forests and plains no human had ever seen. Towering ground sloths lumbered in the undergrowth. Armadillos the size of cars trundled across open land. Herds of horses thundered across prairies, and mammoths roamed in the distance. Predators too prowled. Saber-toothed cats with teeth like daggers. Packs of dire wolves strong enough to bring down giants. To the first humans, these lands must have seemed like a dream, a place of impossible abundance and unimaginable danger. Speculate for a moment on their thoughts. Did they marvel at the size of these beasts, or did they fear them? Did they whisper stories around the fire, inventing names for creatures they had never known? Did they sense that they had stepped into a place so new that it felt like the dawn of the world all over again? But wonder was only part of the story. Survival demanded action. Spears were raised against mammoths, traps set for bison, fires driven into herds to scatter them. Slowly the balance began to shift. The arrival of humans coincided with the disappearance of many of these great creatures. Some vanished through climate change as the Ice Age ended, but others may have fallen to hunting pressure, the numbers dwindling under the relentless needs of human tribes. In this way, the Exodus reshaped not only human destiny, but the destiny of every creature that shared the land. The Americas were vast, and yet humans filled them with astonishing speed. From Alaska to Patagonia, within a few thousand years, footsteps echoed across every plain. Firelight flickered in every forest. It was one of the swiftest expansions in all of prehistory, as though humanity, having reached the final frontier, could not resist pressing to its farthest edge. By the time they reached the southern tip of South America, there was no farther to go. The edge of the world had been reached. What must that moment have felt like? To stand at the coast, waves pounding against cliffs, the Pacific stretching endless to the horizon. Behind, the long trail of migration, Asia, Africa, deserts, seas, glaciers. Ahead, only water and sky. For the first time in tens of thousands of years, there was no new continent waiting. The journey had carried humanity to the end of the earth. And yet, the spirit of movement did not end. Perhaps on that southern shore, they dreamed of islands beyond sight, of lands hidden by sea and mist. Perhaps they launched boats into waters unknown, as they had once done to reach Australia. For the Exodus was never truly finished. It lived on as a restless spark, urging humanity forward even when the land itself had run out. The Americas, though new to humans, were ancient in their own right. Rivers carved canyons deeper than any seen before. Mountains rose higher than the Himalayas. Deserts stretched vast. Forests darkened with age. To step into these landscapes was to confront not only abundance but extremes. Some groups clung to arid plateaus, others to dense jungles, others still to wind-swept plains. Each demanded adaptation, each shaped new cultures, new ways of life. The diversity of the land mirrored itself in the diversity of its people, but always the memory of the journey lingered. Stories may have been told of ancestors who crossed the ice bridge, who braved frozen winds and endless plains. Myths may have been woven of lands beyond the horizon, of gods who guided the crossing. The final chapter of the Exodus was not only written in footsteps, it was carved into memory, into story, into the first beginnings of myth. Speculate further. What if humanity had never crossed into the Americas? What if the glaciers had held, the land bridge remained impassable, or the small bands had perished in the cold? Then the continents would have remained untouched, their megafauna thriving, their valleys empty of firelight. The world would be different, strange, perhaps unrecognizable. That we live in this version of history is proof of the fragility of chance, of the courage of a few who pressed forward when everything seemed against them. The edge of the world was not a wall, it was a mirror. In the Americas, humanity saw its own power reflected, not only to endure landscapes, but to alter them. The Exodus had carried us to every corner of the earth. What remained now was not the question of where to go, but of how to live in a world that had no more untouched frontiers. Close your eyes and picture the last fires of that journey. A small band on the cliffs of Patagonia, their flames flickering in the wind, their voices rising in song. The ocean crashes below, stars blaze above, and in the silence between waves they feel it, the end of the road. They cannot know that their journey has carried the future of all humanity. They cannot know that in their footsteps lies the final chapter of the Exodus. They only know the fire, the cold, the ocean, and the endless memory of walking forward. At the edge of the world, the Exodus was complete. Humanity had gone as far as land could carry it, and in doing so it became not just a species of wanderers, but a species of world makers. Though the journey to the edge of the world seemed solitary, bands of humans pressing against deserts, oceans, and ice, it was never truly so. Humanity did not travel alone. The great Exodus was not only a story of feet upon soil and hands shaping tools, it was also a story of hidden allies, companions that walked beside us, burned within us, and bound us together. Without them, the road would have ended long before Patagonia's cliffs. With them we endured. The first and most faithful was fire. It blazed at our backs from the moment we stepped out of Africa, a fragile sun carried wherever we went. Fire turned night into day, shadows into safety. It softened meat, hardened weapons, and banished cold. To huddle around its glow was to know you were not alone, that even in the darkest forest or the coldest plain there was warmth, light, and a heartbeat that could not be extinguished. Fire was more than a tool, it was a partner, a living thing that demanded tending, feeding, carrying. To let it die was to risk death, to keep it alive was to ensure the tribe endured. Speculate on how fire shaped memory. Every story told on the road was told by firelight. Every song, every myth, every plan whispered into smoke. The flames were not just warmth, they were the stage upon which culture itself was performed. Fire was humanity's first hearth, first altar, first gathering place. It traveled with us, and through it we traveled together. But fire was not our only ally. In time another joined us, the dog. Descended from wolves, these creatures watched from the edges of our camps, drawn to scraps, to warmth, to the presence of fire. At first they must have been rivals, snarling in the dark, eyes glowing beyond the flames, ready to steal food or attack. But slowly something changed. Perhaps a child tossed a bone, or a hunter spared a wolf pup. Slowly trust grew. Wolves became companions, guardians, hunters at our side, and from that trust dogs were born. The dog was the first domesticated animal, the first true partner not bound by necessity but by choice. Imagine the power of that bond on the endless road. Dogs guarded camps at night, their ears sharp, their noses alert. They warned of predators, helped track prey, shared in the hunt. They warmed us in sleep, comforted us in grief, shared in our triumphs. With dogs, we were no longer alone in the wild. We became a pack larger than blood, bound by loyalty and need. Speculate further. How many lineages survived only because of dogs? How many nights were predators kept at bay by their barking? How many hunts ended in success because of their speed? Without them, perhaps some bands would have vanished, their fires extinguished in the dark. With them, survival was more certain. The road was still harsh, but less lonely. And then there was culture, the ally that lived not outside us, but within. Language, memory, ritual, story. These invisible companions bound tribes together across distance and time. Without culture, survival would have been only physical: eat, sleep, endure. But with culture came resilience. A child learned not only how to throw a spear, but why to honor the hunt. An elder taught not only where water could be found, but which spirits guarded it. Culture gave meaning to survival, turning existence into identity. Picture a band gathered in a cave as a storm rages outside. The fire burns, dogs curl in the shadows, and an elder speaks. The children listen, wide-eyed, as stories of ancestors are told, of deserts crossed, seas braved, rivals defeated. These stories are not entertainment alone. They are instruction, memory encoded in myth. They teach the young that the tribe has survived before and will survive again. In this way, culture becomes not just an ally, but a shield against despair. Speculate. What if culture itself was the greatest ally of all? Tools could break, fires could die, even dogs could be lost. But stories endured. Knowledge carried in memory crossed mountains, deserts, oceans. The invisible fire of culture spread farther than any flame, binding humanity into something greater than the sum of its fragile tribes. These allies, fire, dogs, and culture, were the companions that turned survival into destiny. Without fire, the Ice Age would have killed us. Without dogs, predators would have thinned our numbers. Without culture, despair and forgetfulness would have erased us long before the horizon did. Together they formed an unseen army, walking beside every band, guarding every step. Close your eyes and imagine the scene at the end of the Exodus, a camp at the edge of the world. The fire burns, sparks carried into the night sky. Dogs lie at the feet of hunters, ears twitching in the dark. Children whisper stories learned from elders, carrying memory into another dawn. In this circle, humanity is not alone. It is surrounded by allies, some born of nature, some born of spirit, some born of imagination. The Exodus was never walked in solitude. It was shared, every step, every fire, every word, and perhaps that is why it succeeded. Not because we were stronger, faster, or even wiser than all others, but because we traveled with allies, hidden and faithful, carrying us forward when the world itself seemed against us. The road of the Exodus was long, and much of it has faded into silence. Bones weathered into dust, fires gone cold, footprints erased by wind, sand, and tide. Entire lineages vanished without a trace. Yet the story of those journeys did not disappear entirely. It was carried forward in the most intimate archive of all, our genes. Every cell of our bodies holds a record of where we have been, who survived, and who did not. DNA is not only a blueprint for life, it is a map of our past, a living chronicle of the migrations that carried us out of Africa and across the world. Through its codes, we glimpse the fragility of survival, the narrow passages through which our species passed. Genetic studies show that all living humans outside Africa descend from a tiny founding population, perhaps only a few thousand individuals. Imagine that, the entire vast diversity of our world today. Billions of people, countless languages and cultures, all traceable to a fragile thread of survivors. It is as though humanity passed through a bottleneck so narrow that extinction was a possibility at every turn. That we made it through it all is nothing short of miraculous. Speculate for a moment on what that means. Picture a single small band on the move, 40 or 50 people, perhaps fewer. They carry fire, tools, children. They are cold, hungry, uncertain. A storm could scatter them. A famine could starve them. A conflict with rivals could erase them. If they had failed, if their lineage had ended, we would not be here. The story of humanity might have closed before it began. Our very existence is proof of their endurance. Genes trace the paths they walked. In the blood of indigenous Australians lies the memory of that ancient sea crossing 65,000 years ago. In the genomes of Europeans, fragments of Neanderthal ancestry remain, whispers of encounters in caves and forests. In Tibetans, traces of Denisovan DNA carry the adaptation to high altitudes, gifts from unions long forgotten. Each of us carries fragments of others, ghosts of rival humans absorbed into our lineage, shaping our survival in ways we cannot see but still feel. Through DNA, we can follow the roads of the Exodus, like rivers branching outward. Africa remains the deep root, the trunk of the tree. From there, branches spread into Asia, into Europe, into Australia, into the Americas. Some branches grew thick with descendants, others withered, ending in silence. Yet even the broken branches left traces, faint patterns in our genomes that tell us they were once part of the story. And those traces reveal a deeper truth. Survival was never guaranteed. There were moments when humanity teetered on the edge, when only a handful carried the fire forward. Some estimates suggest that our species may have dwindled to as few as a couple of thousand individuals during certain ice age bottlenecks. Imagine that, an entire species, scattered across continents, reduced to the size of a small village. A single disease, a single famine, a single disaster could have ended us, but it did not. Somehow the line endured. Close your eyes and picture that fragility. A camp huddled against the wind. A single fire burning. Children asleep, elders coughing, hunters sharpening spears. They do not know that they are carrying the future of billions in their small, weary band. They do not know that the story of humanity balances on their survival. They only know that they must make it through the night, and they do. And because they do, you are here. Genetics is more than science. It is a reminder of how much we owe to those who came before. Every heartbeat we carry is a testament to lineages that survived deserts, seas, ice, and rivals. Every breath is proof that at least one group, in the face of impossible odds, endured. The evidence is not in stones or bones alone, but in us, living, breathing archives of journeys made long ago. Speculate further. What if the evidence in our genes is only a fraction of the story? What if entire lineages vanished without leaving even a trace in modern DNA? Their fires went out, their bones buried, their memory lost. They walked the same roads, braved the same storms, but left nothing behind but silence. We may never know their names, their faces, their dreams, and yet in their failures they shaped us too. For every lineage that perished, the survivors learned, adapted, pressed forward. Even the vanished are part of the story, written in absence. Our genes remind us of two things at once, our fragility and our resilience. Fragile, because survival was never assured. Resilient, because somehow, despite bottlenecks and extinctions, the line continued. The exodus was not inevitable. It was a thread stretched across the abyss of chance. And by some miracle it held. The evidence is inside you now, in the color of your eyes, the strength of your bones, the way your body responds to altitude or disease. These are echoes of migrations, of encounters, of narrow escapes, the Exodus is not only history, it is your flesh, your breath, your life. At the deepest level, the story of humanity is written not in books or stones, but in blood. And in that blood lies the proof of what was always true. Survival was never guaranteed, but it was won. From the cradle of Africa to the frozen straits of Beringia, from the deserts of Arabia to the cliffs of Patagonia, the story of humanity's exodus is not a straight line, but a scattering of fragile waves. Again and again, small bands set out into uncertainty. Most failed. Their fires went out, their bones sank into silence, their lineages ended without memory, but a few, just enough, survived. And in their survival, they carried all of us. This was no single escape, no triumphant march. It was a rhythm of loss and endurance, a thread stretched thin across deserts, oceans, and ice. Each crossing was a gamble, each step a risk. The miracle is not that we reached the ends of the earth, but that we did so when every turn could have ended in extinction. And so we must ask, did we conquer the world by chance, stumbling forward with luck as our only guide? Or was it destiny, written into us from the beginning, that restless drive to move beyond the horizon, even when nothing awaited us but danger? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps survival is never simply chance or fate, but the union of risk and resolve, failure and endurance. Close your eyes and picture it one last time. A handful of figures walking into desert twilight. Their silhouettes blur against the fading sun, their footprints trailing behind in sand already shifting. They do not know that they carry the future of every human alive today. They do not know that their journey will become the story of us all. They only know the pull of the horizon, the promise of what lies beyond. The footprints fade, the desert swallows them, but the journey continues. In us, in every step we take, in every restless dream that looks to the horizon and asks, what lies beyond?